If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be sharing a hotel room with my boss, Mr. Julian Vance, I would have laughed. A short, sharp panic sound. Then I probably would have needed to sit down and breathe into a paper bag. Because Mr. Vance wasn't just my boss. He was a monument, a man carved from granite and ambition, dressed in suits so sharp they could cut glass, with a voice that vibrated in a register just low enough to make you feel like you were constantly in trouble. He was, for lack of a more elegant term, the central source of my workplace anxiety. And, in the quiet, desperate privacy of my own mind, he was also the object of a fascination so intense it bordered on obsession. My life, before him, was a carefully curated collection of routines. I live alone in a small apartment that was more like a terrarium for a particularly nervous species of houseplant. Me, I was the houseplant. My world was the blue light of my design monitors, the smell of burnt coffee from my perpetually dirty French press, and the comforting, anonymous hum of the city 10 floors below. I was a graphic designer, a good one. I translated corporate jargon into clean lines and pleasing color palettes. I was reliable. I was quiet. I was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. And I liked it that way. Visibility meant risk. It meant being seen, and being seen meant being judged. Mr. Vance, on the other hand, commanded visibility. He didn't just walk into a room. He consumed it. The air pressure changed. People sat up straighter, their fingers flying across keyboards with a sudden, feigned urgency. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that was just a little too long to be fashionable in a corporate setting, which only made him seem more powerful, as if he made the rules. He rarely smiled. When he spoke, his words were clipped, precise, and utterly devoid of fluff. He didn't ask how your weekend was. He asked for results. I had constructed an entire mythology around him from the safe distance of my cubicle. I watched the way his jaw tightened when he was reviewing a subpar presentation. I noticed the faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny flaw in an otherwise perfect, intimidating facade. I memorized the sound of his leather shoes on the polished concrete floors of the office. He was a force of nature, a storm system I tracked from a safe distance, content to just observe the beautiful, terrifying lightning. The distance between us wasn't just the physical space of the open plan office. It was a chasm. He was Mr. Vance, head of creative. I was Leo, a mid-level designer whose name he probably only knew because it appeared on my project files. He was the sun. I was a forgotten satellite, caught in his orbit, but destined to remain cold and dark. That was the established order of things. It was a painful sort of comfort, the kind you find in a predictable ache. You know what to expect. Then came a conference. The disruption arrived in the form of a calendar invitation. Design Forward Summit, Seattle. My name was on the attendee list, right below his. It felt like a typo. A clerical error that would soon be rectified with a polite, impersonal email from his assistant. I spent an entire day waiting for that email, my stomach a tangled knot of eels. It never came. The trip itself was a blur of professional awkwardness. I trailed in his wake through airport security, sat 3 rows behind him on the plane, and checked into a hotel room on a completely different floor. We were in the same city, at the same event, but the chasm remained. I watched him command a room during a panel discussion, fielding questions with an effortless intelligence that made my palms sweat. I sketched his profile on the margins of my notebook instead of taking notes on current trends. It was the same as it ever was. Me watching. Him being watched. The final day of the conference was when the universe decided to get drunk and rewrite the script. The keynote speaker droned on, and outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the convention center, the sky turned a bruised, sickly shade of gray. Flurries of snow started, then thickened into a blinding wall of white. By the time we were released, the city was grinding to a halt. Flights were canceled. The roads were becoming impassable. I found him in the hotel lobby, standing by the concierge desk, his back ramrod straight. He was on the phone, his voice a low, frustrated rumble. "No, I understand that," he was saying, his patience clearly worn to a thread. "What I don't understand is how a hotel of this size can be fully booked." There has to be something, a pause. His shoulders tensed. Fine. Thank you. He ended the call without a goodbye, slipping the phone into his pocket with a sharp, angry motion. He turned, and for a split second, his eyes met mine. The polite, professional mask was gone. In its place was a raw, unfiltered exhaustion. A flash of vulnerability, so unexpected it felt like I was seeing something I shouldn't have. He seemed to see me for the first time, too. Not as a piece of office furniture, but as a person. Another person, stranded just like him. Leo, he said. My name. He said my name. It sounded strange in his mouth, less like a summons and more like a simple statement of fact. Mr. Vance, I manage my voice a squeak. They canceled my flight. I assume yours is gone, too. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to form words. My own flight notification had pinged half an hour ago, a death knell for my hopes of returning to my quiet, safe terrarium. And my room is gone, he continued, gesturing vaguely at the desk. They gave it away. Assumed I was checking out, he let out a harsh, humorless laugh. The whole city is booked solid. Convention plus the storm. Nothing. Not a single room. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My own room was booked for one more night. It was a precaution I always took, a buffer against the chaos of travel. A little quirk of my anxiety that was suddenly terribly relevant. The words formed in my throat before I could stop them. They felt like they were being pulled out of me by some external force. I have my room, I said, for tonight. It has 2 beds. The silence that followed was immense. It was a physical weight pressing down on me. I watched him process my offer, his dark eyes searching my face for something. I didn't know what. A joke? A trap? He looked from me to the swirling snow outside the glass doors, then back to me. The granite facade seemed to crack just a little. He looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen a person look. Are you sure? He asked, his voice softer now, devoid of the usual authority. I just nodded again. My throat was too tight to speak. And that's how it happened. That's how I ended up riding a crowded elevator with Mr. Julian Vance, the silence between us crackling with a strange, terrifying energy. The forced proximity I had always dreaded was now a reality. We were heading to my room. Our room. The thought sent a tremor through my entire body. The chasm had not just been crossed. It had been obliterated by a blizzard. The hotel room was aggressively beige. 2 queen beds, a small desk, a generic painting of a seascape on the wall. It was my anonymous sanctuary, and now he was in it, filling the space with his presence. He dropped his briefcase by the door, and the sound echoed in the quiet room. He seemed too large for the space, like a panther in a canary cage. He loosened his tie, pulling the knot down with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire week. He unbuttoned the top button of his crisp white shirt. I watched the small domestic act with a kind of breathless fascination. This was not Mr. Vance, the corporate titan. This was a man, a tired man, stranded in a storm. I busied myself with meaningless tasks. I hung my jacket in the closet. I straightened the notepad on the desk. I was trying to pretend this was normal. A perfectly normal situation for an employee and his boss. My heart was a frantic drummer, pounding out a rhythm of pure panic. He stood by the window, looking out at the snow, which was coming down in thick, hypnotic sheets. The city lights were blurred into soft, hazy orbs. Looks like we're not going anywhere, he said, his voice a low murmur. No, sir, I replied automatically. The sir slipped out, a relic of our office dynamic that sounded absurd in the intimacy of this room. He turned from the window, and a faint, wry smile touched his lips. It was a startling sight. Julian, he said, I think under the circumstances, you can call me Julian. The name felt foreign, forbidden. I tried to say it, but the word got stuck in my throat. He must have seen the conflict on my face because he changed the subject. I'm going to take a shower. If that's all right, of course, I stammered, turning away quickly, focusing on the terrible seascape as if it were the most interesting piece of art I had ever seen. I heard the click of the bathroom door, the rush of water. I was alone, but his presence lingered. His suit jacket was slung over a chair. His briefcase was by the door. His scent, something clean and sharp, like cedar and cold air, was in the room. I sat on the edge of the bed farthest from the door. My bed, my designated territory. I tried to breathe. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. It was the technique my therapist had taught me for panic attacks. It wasn't working. My mind was a chaotic swirl of what-ifs and oh my gods. When he came out of the bathroom, he was different. The transformation was startling. He wore a plain gray t-shirt and a pair of dark sweatpants he must have had packed in his bag. His hair was damp and tousled, falling across his forehead. Without the armor of his suit, he looked younger, softer. The sharp edges were blurred, and he looked human. I saw the weariness in the lines around his eyes, a faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. I noticed the way his t-shirt stretched across his shoulders. He wasn't a monument anymore. He was just a man, a breathtakingly handsome man, but a man nonetheless. Feeling a little more human, he said, running a hand through his damp hair. I could only nod. He picked up the remote from the small table between the beds. I, at the exact same moment, reached for the bottle of water sitting next to it. It was a collision of intentions, a tiny, mundane accident in the grand scheme of things. But when his fingers brushed against the back of my hand, the world stopped. It wasn't a spark. It was a wildfire, a sudden, searing heat that shot up my arm and straight to my chest, where it set off a series of explosions. My breath hitched. My skin prickled. It was the briefest of touches, lasting less than a second, but it felt like a brand. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. He froze, the remote still in his hand. He looked at my hand, then at my face. His expression was unreadable, a mask of calm descending over the flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Sorry," he said, his voice neutral. "No, it's fine," I mumbled, my face burning. I was sure he could hear the frantic, stupid thumping of my heart from across the room. The air was thick with what had just happened, a tiny event that felt monumental. A line had been crossed. An invisible barrier had been touched, and it had crackled with an energy I didn't know what to do with. He turned on the television, flipping through channels with a detached air. But his movements were stiff. He was aware of it, too. He had to be. That little shock of contact. It couldn't have been just me. He settled on a news channel, the volume low. The reporter was talking about the storm, showing images of buried cars and empty highways. The sound was a dull drone, a backdrop to the screaming silence inside the room. "Looks like we'll have another day here," he said, his eyes on the screen. Another day. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. An hour passed, or maybe it was a minute. Time had become a strange, elastic thing. He sat in the armchair by the window, scrolling through something on his phone. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, pretending to be relaxed. Every tiny sound was magnified. The creak of his chair, the tap of his thumb on the screen, the sound of his breathing. Then, he swore under his breath. A soft, vicious sound. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up from his phone, and the frustration was back on his face, etched deep. "It's my daughter's birthday tomorrow," he said. The words were flat, heavy. I promised I'd be there to take her to the skating rink, my carefully constructed image of him shattered into a million pieces. A daughter. Of course, he had a life. A family. A wife. The thought landed like a punch to the gut. It was a stupid assumption to think otherwise, but my fantasy version of him existed in a vacuum, a world that consisted only of the office and my imagination. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. The disappointment I felt was for him, for this unknown little girl, and selfishly, for the confirmation of a reality I had tried to ignore. He rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture of pure, unadulterated weariness. "It's the third thing I've had to miss this month. She's 7. She's starting to notice." He looked at me, his eyes dark with a kind of weary resignation that I recognized. It was the look of someone trying to hold too many things at once, terrified of dropping them all. "She thinks I care more about my work than I do about her." In that moment, the dynamic between us flipped on its head. He wasn't my imposing boss. He was a father, filled with guilt and regret. He was vulnerable. The power he held over me in the office, the professional hierarchy that defined our entire relationship, it all just dissolved. I found myself speaking without thinking, the words coming from a place of simple, human empathy. My dad traveled a lot for work when I was a kid, I said softly. I used to get so angry when he'd miss stuff, but he would always send me a postcard from wherever he was. And he'd draw these stupid little cartoons on them. A penguin in a sombrero if he was somewhere warm, a polar bear in sunglasses if he was somewhere cold. It was his way of saying he was thinking of me. I stopped, horrified. Why was I telling him this? Babbling about my childhood. He was probably just wishing I would shut up. But he wasn't. He was watching me, his expression intent. He had put his phone down. He was listening. A penguin in a sombrero, he repeated, and the corner of his mouth twitched upwards in that ghost of smile again. That's actually a pretty good idea. It was stupid, I said, my cheeks flushing. But as a kid, it made me feel like I was with him, you know? A part of his trip. No, it's not stupid, he said, his voice quiet but firm. It's brilliant. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. Thank you. Leo, he said my name again. This time, it felt different. It felt like he was talking to me, not to his employee. The space between the two beds didn't feel like a chasm anymore. It just felt like a few feet of beige carpet. I had, in some small, insignificant way, helped him. I had offered him something other than my work. I had offered him a piece of myself. The playing field, for the first time ever, felt level. The evening wore on. We didn't talk much more, but the silence had changed. It was no longer tense and crackling. It was comfortable, companionable. We ordered room service, eating burgers and fries in a quiet understanding, the television murmuring in the background. It was the most surreal meal of my life. Later, when it was time to sleep, a fresh wave of anxiety washed over me. We were going to sleep in the same room. The thought was intensely intimate. We turned off the lights, plunging the room into a deep darkness broken only by the thin sliver of light under the door and the faint, blue-white glow of the snow outside the window. Good night, Leo. His voice came from the other bed, a low rumble in the dark. Good night. Julian, I whispered. The name finally came out. It felt like a confession. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the sound of his breathing, the soft rustle of sheets as he shifted. My body was humming with a strange, nervous energy. I was acutely aware of him, of his presence just a few feet away. Every fantasy I had ever entertained about him felt pale and flimsy compared to this strange, terrifying, and deeply real moment. The room was cold. I shivered, pulling the thin hotel comforter up to my chin. The heating unit was making a strange, rattling noise, but it wasn't putting out much warmth. From the other bed, I heard him sigh. Are you cold? He asked. His voice was thick with sleep. A little, I admitted. Another silence. Then the sound of movement. I could make out his shape in the gloom, sitting up. The comforter in this place is a joke, he said. It's like a single sheet of paper. My heart started to pound again. What is he doing? He stood up. I could see his silhouette against the window. He was walking toward my bed. Every muscle in my body went rigid. This was it. This was the moment where I wake up from the dream, or the moment the dream becomes something else entirely. He stopped at the foot of my bed. Do you? He started, his voice hesitant. It was the first time I had ever heard him sound unsure of anything. Do you mind if the beds are big enough. We could share mine. It might be warmer. The question hung in the air between us. It was a simple, practical suggestion, born of a cold room and thin blankets. But it felt like so much more. It felt like a precipice, a choice. My voice was a thread. Okay. He didn't say anything else. He just walked back to his bed, and I heard him pull back the covers. I lay frozen for a moment longer, my mind screaming. Then I moved. I swung my legs out of my bed, my feet hitting the cold floor. I walked the few steps to his bed, every movement feeling slow and deliberate, like I was moving through water. I slipped under the covers. The space was immediately warmer, filled with his body heat. He was lying on his side, his back to me. The bed was big, but not that big. I was intensely aware of the inches separating us. I could feel the heat radiating from him. I could smell that clean, cedar scent on his pillow. I lay on my back, staring up at the dark ceiling, my body so tense I felt like I might snap. I was trying to breathe silently, trying to make myself as small as possible. Then he shifted, turning over to face me. In the faint light from the window, I could just make out the shape of his face. His eyes were open. He was looking at me. "Leo," he whispered, his voice rough. "Yeah." I breathed. He was quiet for a long moment. I could feel the question he wasn't asking. I could feel the same questions screaming inside my own head. What is this? What are we doing? And then he confessed something. It wasn't about his daughter or his work. It was about right now. "I haven't," he started, then stopped, as if searching for the words. "I haven't felt this." Quiet in my own head for years, he let out a small, shaky breath. "Being here, with you. It's quiet," that was it. That was the crack in the granite. He wasn't just tired or stressed. He was lonely, the same way I was. His loneliness was just louder, busier, hidden behind a desk and a title and a family he was struggling to keep up with. My loneliness was quiet, curated, a fortress I had built around myself. But it was the same thing. His vulnerability was a gift. It was an invitation. And it gave me a courage I didn't know I possessed. "Me too," I whispered back. "It's never quiet for me. But it is now." He moved, just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough. His knee brushed against mine under the covers. The contact was electric, just like before, but this time I didn't pull away. I leaned into it. He lifted his hand, his fingers hesitating in the space between us before they gently, tentatively, touched my cheek. His thumb stroked softly along my jawline. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a shock wave through my entire system. It was a question, and I had my answer. I closed the small distance between us. Our lips met. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was slow. It was hesitant and questioning. It tasted of burger and faint mint from toothpaste and something that was just him. It was a conversation. It was a confession of its own, a mutual admission of a desire that had been hiding in plain sight, buried under layers of professionalism and fear. He deepened the kiss, his other hand coming up to cradle the back of my neck, pulling me closer. My own hands, seeming to have a mind of their own, went to his waist, gripping the soft cotton of his t-shirt. All the anxiety, all the fear, it all just melted away, replaced by a feeling so warm and overwhelming I thought I might actually burst. This was real. It was happening. Julian Vance, my boss, my obsession, was kissing me in a hotel room in the middle of a blizzard, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been before. The morning came too soon, a pale, gray light filtering through the gap in the curtains. I woke up slowly, surfacing from the deepest, most peaceful sleep I'd had in years. For a blissful moment, I forgot where I was. I felt warm, secure. There was an arm slung possessively over my waist, a heavy weight that was both comforting and unfamiliar. That all came rushing back. The snow, the room, Julian. My eyes snapped open. I was still in his bed, tangled up with him. His face was just inches from mine, his expression soft in sleep. The harsh lines of his face were gone, replaced by a boyish vulnerability. His dark hair was a mess against the white pillowcase. His breathing was a slow, steady rhythm against my ear. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over me. It was so potent it almost made me dizzy. I let myself savor it for a single, perfect second. And then the panic set in. My heart started a frantic, sick thudding in my chest. What have I done? The question screamed through my mind, obliterating the peaceful quiet of the morning. I had slept with my boss. I had kissed my boss. I had crossed a line that wasn't just a line. It was a canyon, and I had swan dived right into it. He would wake up. He would remember, and he would regret it. The thought was a shard of ice in my stomach. He would see me in the harsh morning light, and the spell would be broken. He would put his suit back on, and with it his authority, his distance. He would become Mr. Vance again, and I would be the foolish, lovesick employee who had taken advantage of a moment of weakness. I had ruined everything. My job, my carefully constructed, invisible life. Carefully, painstakingly, I began to extricate myself from his hold. I lifted his arm from my waist, my movements slow and agonizingly precise. I slid out of the bed, my feet hitting the cold floor. The air in the room felt frigid against my skin. He didn't stir. He just mumbled something in his sleep and rolled over. I grabbed my clothes and fled to the bathroom, closing the door without a sound. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked wild. My hair was standing on end. My eyes were wide with a mixture of exhilaration and pure terror. The person looking back at me was not the same person who had checked into this room yesterday. When I came out, he was gone. The bed was empty. His side was rumpled, the indentation of his head still on the pillow. But he was gone. His suitcase was gone. His suit jacket was no longer slung over the chair. A neatly folded pile of cash was sitting on the nightstand. Enough to cover the room service, and then some. It felt like a payment, a transaction. The quiet in the room was different now. It was a hollow, ringing silence. The warmth of the previous night had vanished, sucked out into the cold morning air. My solitude, which had once been my greatest comfort, now felt like a punishment. It was no longer just solitude. It was an absence. The shape of him was imprinted on the room, on the bed, on my skin, and the fact that he wasn't there was a physical ache. I got dressed in a daze. I packed my bag. I didn't touch the money. I couldn't. The journey home was a special kind of hell. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of pristine, silent white. The airport was a chaotic mess of rescheduled flights and frayed nerves. I managed to get on a standby list. During the entire ordeal, I kept scanning the crowds, looking for him. A part of me hoped to see him, to have a chance to. What? Talk? Apologize? A bigger part of me was terrified of seeing him. I didn't. I flew home alone. The following Monday at work was excruciating. I walked into the office feeling like I had a giant, flashing sign above my head that read, "I slept with the boss." Every glance from a coworker felt like an accusation. Every whispered conversation seemed to be about me. My anxiety, which had been a low hum for so long, was now a full-blown orchestral symphony of dread. I avoided him all morning. I took the long way to the coffee machine. I kept my head down, focusing on my monitor with an intensity that made my eyes burn. But I was aware of him. I felt his presence like a change in the weather. I heard his voice on a conference call, and the low, familiar timbre sent a jolt through me. Around noon, an email popped up in my inbox. The sender, Julian Vance. My heart leaped into my throat. The subject line was simple. My office, the body of the email, was even simpler. Now this was it. The firing. The professional execution. I felt my legs go weak as I stood up. The walk to his office felt like the longest walk of my life. His door was glass, and I could see his silhouette inside, sitting at his large, imposing desk. I knocked softly. "Come in," he called out. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, closing it gently behind me. He didn't look up at first. He was staring at his computer screen, his jaw tight. The suit was back on. The armor was firmly in place. This was Mr. Vance. The man from the hotel seemed like a figment of my imagination, a dream I'd had in a snowstorm. "Close the blinds," he said, still not looking at me. My hands trembled as I reached for the cord, pulling the metal slats shut, encasing us in a sterile, fluorescent-lit privacy. The sound of the office outside was muffled. He finally looked at me. His expression was exhausted. The weariness from the hotel was back, but this time it was laced with something else. Something that looked like regret. "Leo," he started, his voice low. "About Seattle, you don't have to say anything." I cut in, the words tumbling out of me in a rush. I needed to get it over with. "I understand. It was a mistake. The storm, the weird situation. I get it. It won't happen again. I'm a professional. You don't have to worry about me making things awkward. I'll even start looking for another job if that makes things easier." "Stop," he said. The word was sharp, commanding. It cut through my panicked rambling and silenced me instantly. He stood up and walked around his desk, coming to stand just a few feet away from me. He looked lost. The confidence, the authority, it was all a performance. I could see that now. Leaving the money was a stupid, cowardly thing to do, he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't place. I panicked. I woke up, and I saw you, and all I could think about was the 100 ways this could go wrong. I'm your boss. There's a power imbalance. I thought. I thought I was taking advantage of you. I stared at him, speechless. That was the last thing I had expected to hear. And then I left, he continued, running a hand through his hair in that same gesture of frustration I now knew so well. And it was the wrong thing to do. The silence this past weekend. It's been unbearable. I couldn't think. I couldn't work. All I could think about was you. He took a step closer. My breath caught in my chest. Was a mistake, Leo? He asked, his voice soft, vulnerable. His eyes searched mine, and I saw the same fear and uncertainty that I felt reflected there. You have to tell me the truth. Because for me, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like the first real thing that's happened to me in a very long time, the wall I had built around my heart. The one I had been reinforcing brick by brick since I'd woken up alone in that hotel room. It just crumbled. All the fear, the anxiety, the self-recrimination, it all washed away, replaced by a wave of raw, hopeful emotion. No, I whispered, my voice thick. It didn't feel like a mistake. A visible wave of relief washed over his features. The tension in his shoulders seemed to melt away. Good, he breathed. That's good. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He did something with his thumb, then held it out for me to see. It was our corporate messaging app. With a decisive swipe, he deleted it. I don't want to be your boss anymore, Leo, he said, his eyes locked on mine. Not like that. I want to be Julian. Just Julian. He took my phone from my hand, his fingers warm against mine. He keyed in his number and saved it under Julian, not Mr. Vance. He handed it back to me. I'm resigning, he said quietly. My jaw dropped. What? No, you can't. This is your life, your career. It's a job. He corrected me gently. A job I'm very good at, but it's not my life. I've been thinking about what you said. About your dad. About the penguin in the sombrero. I realized I've been building this career, this empire, but I've completely neglected building a life. The one I actually want. He took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. He gently took my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. I want a life that has you in it, he whispered. Outside of these walls. If you'll have me, it was a promise. A tangible act of commitment so profound it stole the air from my lungs. He was willing to walk away from everything he had built, just for a chance. For us. Tears welled in my eyes, not of sadness or fear, but of a joy so overwhelming it was painful. I could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. He leaned in and kissed me, right there in his office with the blinds closed. It was a different kiss from the one in the hotel. It wasn't questioning or hesitant. It was a promise, a confirmation, a beginning. 3 months later, I woke up to the smell of coffee. Not my usual burnt, bitter sludge, but rich, good coffee. The morning light was streaming into my small apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I was in my own bed, and I was not alone. Julian was in my tiny kitchen, wearing a pair of my gray sweatpants that were far too short on him, and an old t-shirt of mine. He was humming to himself as he worked my finicky French press with an expert's concentration. He looked utterly, completely at home. He turned and saw me watching him from the doorway of my bedroom. That smile, the one I had once thought was so rare, spread across his face. It was a sight that still made my heart do a little flip. "Morning," he said, his voice warm and husky with sleep. "Morning," I replied, leaning against the doorframe, a lazy smile on my own face. He had done it. He'd resigned. It had sent shockwaves through the company, but he'd been resolute. He was consulting now, working from home, making his own hours. He'd taken his daughter skating. He'd been to every one of her soccer games since. He was building a life, and somehow I was at the center of it. He brought over 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to me. Our fingers brushed, and the familiar jolt was still there. But now, it wasn't a source of panic. It was a source of comfort, a reminder. We stood there in my sun-drenched kitchen, sipping our coffee in a comfortable domestic silence. This was our new routine. Saturdays spent together, making breakfast, talking about everything and nothing. The quiet, solitary life I had so carefully curated was gone, and I had never been happier. I looked at him, At this man who had once been a figure of intimidation, a distant monument I admired from afar. He was no longer Mr. Vance, the force of nature. He was Julian, the man who knew I took too much sugar in my coffee, the man who left his socks on the floor, the man who held me when I had nightmares. He was the plot twist I never saw coming. He had been the disruption to my quiet, ordered life. But he hadn't destroyed it. He had blasted it wide open, letting in the light and the air and a kind of love I never, ever thought was possible for someone like me. He hadn't just saved me from a blizzard in Seattle. He had saved me from myself, from the safe, lonely fortress I had mistaken for a home. He was my home now, and it was a future I couldn't wait to build, one cup of coffee at a time. Looking back, I realized that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and taking the leap anyway. It's about offering your hotel room to your intimidating boss, confessing your own childhood hurts, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable, even when every instinct is screaming at you to run and hide. It's about realizing that the greatest risks often lead to the most beautiful, unexpected rewards. Have you ever had a moment in your life that felt like a complete plot twist, something that changed your entire trajectory? A person or an event that shattered your routine and forced you to become someone new, someone braver? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. What was the risk you took that paid off in the end? Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more stories about finding love in unexpected places, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world.